The galaxy had always been a place of wonders and dangers, but no threat was as feared as the Deathworld Alliance. This alliance was not just a single planet or one powerful civilization. It was a coalition of the deadliest, most warlike worlds in the known universe. Each planet in the alliance had its own brutal rulers, leaders who were not just skilled in war but seemed to thrive on fear and destruction. They had conquered world after world, leaving trails of devastation that others whispered about in horror. The mere mention of the Deathworld Alliance could make a commander break into a cold sweat, and ordinary citizens would pray that their names would never be recorded in the Alliance's war logs. The Alliance had not come together by accident. Centuries earlier, these planets had been rivals, fighting each other over resources, territory, and power. Yet a common vision emerged among the strongest leaders, a vision to dominate the galaxy completely. They realized that together, their combined strength would make them unstoppable. Over time, they formed the Deathworld Alliance, uniting their fleets, armies, and war technologies. It was a union forged not by friendship, but by a shared thirst for power and a desire to crush anyone who dared oppose them. Each member of the alliance had a reputation that alone could strike terror. On one planet, the soil itself was said to be infused with toxins that could kill anyone who set foot without protection. Yet its soldiers were trained to thrive in such conditions. On another world, storms raged constantly, lightning striking without warning, yet the inhabitants had adapted so well that they could fight in the worst weather without fear. Their armies were not just strong, they were bred for survival in environments that no ordinary being could endure. To them, pain, danger, and death were not obstacles, they were tools. The galaxy watched as the alliance grew. Systems that tried to resist were crushed without mercy. Entire fleets were annihilated, cities burned, and populations enslaved or exterminated. The leaders of the alliance left messages for the worlds they conquered, not just demanding surrender, but making it clear that resistance was meaningless. "Join us or be destroyed," these messages would say. And for most, joining was not really a choice, it was survival. Those who resisted were swiftly and decisively eliminated, their planets becoming cautionary tales whispered across distant star systems. Despite their fearsome reputation, many civilizations underestimated the Alliance's cunning. They assumed the Alliance's brutality was just raw aggression, but it was also highly strategic. Every attack, every invasion, every conquest was carefully planned. The Alliance's leaders studied their enemies, understood their weaknesses, and used them ruthlessly. They never wasted their power, and they never underestimated their prey. While they were feared for their strength, it was their intelligence and discipline that made them nearly impossible to defeat. Earth, meanwhile, remained untouched and largely unknown to the Deathworld Alliance. Humans had built their own world, exploring space slowly, cautiously, and mostly defensively. Earthlings were still discovering the wider galaxy, their fleets small and their technology advancing steadily but quietly. To the Alliance, humanity was nothing more than a distant curiosity, a minor civilization that could be ignored while they focused on more immediate conquests. Humans were seen as weak, fragile, and unprepared for the horrors of interstellar warfare. That underestimation would prove crucial in the years to come. On the edge of the galaxy, the Alliance was already planning its next campaign. Scouts had located rich, unprotected worlds that were perfect targets for conquest. The leaders of the Deathworld Alliance held meetings in massive command centers, each discussion filled with cold calculation and strategy. They spoke of fleets, weapons, and the precise timing of attacks. There was no room for error. Everything had to be perfect. Failure was not just unacceptable, it was unimaginable for a group that had come so far by crushing everything in its path. Their confidence was absolute, their arrogance palpable. No one in the galaxy, they believed, could possibly challenge them. Yet there were whispers in distant star systems about the coming threat. Traders, explorers, and diplomats had glimpsed the movement of the Alliance's fleets, noting the speed and coordination that seemed almost impossible. Some civilizations began to prepare defenses, sending fleets to guard vulnerable systems, fortifying planets and training armies. But even these measures felt insufficient. The Alliance was always one step ahead, and many knew that their efforts might be like trying to stop a hurricane with a single tree. Meanwhile, life on Earth continued mostly unaware of the looming storm. Humans went about their daily lives, exploring space slowly, studying the stars and sending out small exploratory ships. They observed other planets, hoping to find allies, trade, or knowledge, but they had no idea that the deadliest military force in the galaxy was rising, preparing to expand its empire. Scientists debated the possibility of intelligent life, political leaders discussed interstellar trade, and military strategists planned for defensive measures. But nothing could compare to the scale of the threat that awaited them. The Deathworld Alliance at this point was at its peak. It had fleets that could obliterate worlds, soldiers trained to survive in conditions that would kill ordinary beings, and leaders whose intelligence matched their cruelty. It was an empire built on fear, power, and absolute control. Entire sectors of the galaxy had been reshaped in their image, with no room left for resistance. And yet the stage was unknowingly set for a new player to enter the galaxy, one that no one expected, one that could challenge even the mightiest alliance. That player was Earth, and humanity's role in the coming battle was about to change everything. As the Deathworld Alliance readied its next attack, the galaxy held its breath. The conquered worlds trembled under the shadow of their rulers. Leaders on distant planets feared the Alliance's wrath, and Earth, untested and underestimated, prepared silently, unaware that the moment to prove its strength was approaching faster than anyone could imagine. The Alliance believed itself invincible, but history had a way of surprising even the most powerful, and soon, the first spark of that surprise would ignite. The universe, vast and endless, seemed calm at first glance, but beneath the silence, warships stirred, soldiers trained, and commanders plotted. The Deathworld Alliance was ready to strike, confident that nothing could stand in their way. And yet far across the stars, Earth's inhabitants were beginning a quiet preparation of their own, unaware that their courage, ingenuity, and determination would soon challenge the deadliest force the galaxy had ever seen. In this way, the stage for an epic confrontation was set. The Deathworld Alliance, powerful, ruthless, and feared, believed the galaxy belonged to them. Humanity, underestimated and unseen, was about to enter the stage, unaware of the immense challenges ahead, but with a resilience that would surprise everyone. And so the story of the first clash between the unstoppable conquerors and the seemingly fragile humans began, marking the start of a battle that would be remembered across the stars for generations. The Deathworld Alliance moved through the galaxy like a storm that could not be stopped. Their next target was a wealthy, resource-rich colony on the edge of a peaceful sector. This colony had grown prosperous because of trade and natural resources, and its people had lived relatively safe lives, unaware of the horrors approaching. But the Alliance's scouts had found it, and the leaders decided that this world would be their next demonstration of power. They wanted to send a message to the galaxy: resist us and you will be crushed. The colony's leaders received warnings too late. Their military was strong for a civilian colony, but compared to the Deathworld Alliance, it was almost nothing. The Alliance's fleets, vast and precise, descended upon the planet without hesitation. Ships larger than cities filled the skies, and weapons more powerful than anything the colony had ever seen began firing. The colony's defenses tried to respond, but their lasers and shields were no match for the highly advanced technology of the invaders. Buildings shook, skies burned, and panic spread through the streets. The citizens ran, hoping for safety, but everywhere they looked there was destruction. Despite the chaos, the colony's soldiers fought bravely. They had trained for emergencies, and though they were unprepared for an enemy like this, they refused to give up. They launched counterattacks, trying to hit the enemy ships with whatever weapons they had. Small fighter squads darted between massive warships, hoping to exploit any weakness. But the Deathworld Alliance anticipated these moves, their commanders predicting each action and countering it before it could succeed. Slowly, methodically, the colony's defenses began to fall. The scale of destruction was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Entire cities were obliterated within hours. Communication systems were destroyed, leaving survivors isolated and terrified. The Deathworld Alliance did not simply conquer, they made examples of their victims. Strategic targets were destroyed to break morale, and symbols of leadership and culture were erased. The colony's population watched in horror as their homes, schools, and marketplaces were reduced to rubble. Many tried to flee into space, hoping their ships could escape. But the Alliance had already blocked escape routes with massive fleets. Survival became almost impossible. Nearby civilizations watched these events unfold with growing fear. Messages from fleeing survivors spread across the galaxy, telling stories of the Alliance's overwhelming power. Even advanced military powers were shocked at how quickly the colony had fallen. Analysts and commanders tried to understand how such destruction could happen so fast, but the more they learned, the clearer it became. The Deathworld Alliance was not only strong but brilliant in planning. They were ruthless, but their ruthlessness was paired with cunning strategy. The galaxy had never faced an enemy like this. While the colony was being destroyed, there were moments of individual heroism. Ordinary citizens, faced with unimaginable danger, risked their lives to save others. Parents carried children through burning streets. Engineers used collapsing buildings for cover while helping the wounded. Pilots launched desperate attacks to slow the enemy, buying time for civilians to reach escape pods. Even in the face of total destruction, courage and determination shone like sparks in the darkness. These acts of bravery would be remembered long after the planet itself had been devastated. Amid the chaos, the leaders of the Deathworld Alliance maintained calm. They were not driven by anger or emotion. They were guided by precise calculation. Every strike was designed to achieve maximum impact with minimal waste of resources. Every move sent a clear message: resistance was futile. Their fleets coordinated flawlessly, moving like a single enormous organism. Ships would appear from nowhere, striking targets from angles no one expected. The colony's defenders were overwhelmed not just by power, but by sheer unpredictability. The survivors of the colony carried tales of the Alliance's cruelty. They described entire neighborhoods reduced to ash in moments, ships larger than mountains firing weapons that could disintegrate structures instantly, and soldiers who seemed almost inhuman, trained to survive and fight in the deadliest conditions. These stories spread like wildfire, terrifying other worlds and cementing the Alliance's reputation as unstoppable. It became clear that the Deathworld Alliance did not simply conquer. They eradicated any trace of defiance, leaving fear as their lasting legacy. However, the Alliance's success came with overconfidence. They were so used to winning that they began underestimating those who did not yet know fear. They assumed that all civilizations would crumble like the colony had. This assumption would later prove to be a critical error. Even as they celebrated victory, they failed to notice that distant observers, including humans on Earth, were watching carefully. Earth had not yet entered the galactic stage, but its scientists, strategists, and leaders were beginning to analyze every move of the Alliance. Every action, every tactic, every flaw in the Deathworld strategy was being noted. The battle also revealed something else about the Deathworld Alliance. They were not invincible in every way. Even in the colony's destruction, some resistance had forced minor delays, some strategies had been foiled, and some of the Alliance's forces had suffered unexpected losses. These small weaknesses were barely noticeable amid the massive destruction, but they were there. They showed that the Alliance, while terrifying and dominant, was not perfect. For the first time, the galaxy saw a hint that even the deadliest force might have vulnerabilities. After the colony fell, the Alliance moved on quickly. They did not linger, as leaving survivors or rebuilding anything would risk resistance forming. Their strategy was simple: conquer, destroy, and move to the next target. And yet, in their wake, rumors began spreading of a civilization that had been quietly observing, one that might rise to challenge them. Earth was still untested, its fleet small, its technology unproven, but the very idea that someone could study and learn the Alliance's methods planted a seed of worry. However faint, for the galaxy, the first clash was terrifying. It demonstrated what the Deathworld Alliance could do, and it left civilizations scrambling for protection. The Alliance had proven that might alone could crush even prepared defenses. Yet it also set the stage for a response. The more the galaxy learned about the Alliance, the more it became clear that someone would eventually have to stand against them. And though humans were far from the battle, their strategic minds, creativity, and resilience were quietly preparing them for the moment they would enter the fight. A moment that would surprise everyone, including the Alliance. The destruction of the colony was a dark chapter in galactic history, but it was also the spark that would ignite hope. Survivors who escaped carried knowledge, stories, and warnings. They spread word of courage, of small victories amid chaos, and of the sheer intelligence required to face the Alliance. Across the galaxy, civilizations began to take note. Fear alone might not be enough to stop resistance. And far away on Earth, humanity's leaders quietly studied every report, preparing in ways that no one could yet see, preparing for a battle that would change the course of the galaxy forever. The first clash of the Deathworld alliance was complete, and the colony was lost. Yet in the shadows, the seeds of resistance were being sown. The galaxy had witnessed the alliance's power, but it had also begun to see cracks in their seemingly perfect dominance. The stage was being set for a confrontation that no one expected, one that would test the courage, intelligence, and determination of a small, underestimated civilization, Earth. And though the galaxy trembled under the might of the Deathworld alliance, it was on the verge of learning that even the deadliest conquerors could meet a challenge they had never imagined. Humanity had long been considered a minor player in the galaxy. While other civilizations expanded aggressively across star systems, humans were focused on exploration, science, and survival. Their fleets were small, their technology advanced but limited compared to the galaxy's great powers, and their military had never faced the kind of merciless adversaries that the Deathworld alliance represented. To the alliance, Earth was insignificant, so insignificant that they barely considered its existence when planning their campaigns. This underestimation would soon prove to be one of humanity's greatest advantages. On Earth, the first reports of the Deathworld Alliance's attack on distant colonies caused concern among governments and scientific communities. Astronomers, analysts, and military strategists studied every fragment of information, analyzing the Alliance's tactics, technology, and strategies. Unlike other civilizations, humans did not panic or attempt to confront the Alliance immediately with force. Instead, they began to prepare carefully, quietly, and intelligently. They knew that direct confrontation with the Alliance in open battle would be suicide. Instead, they focused on understanding, observation, and strategy. Earth scientists and engineers worked tirelessly to develop technology capable of countering the Alliance's strengths. They studied alien designs captured from scouts in early skirmishes, analyzing weapons, shields, and propulsion systems. Using human ingenuity, they began to reverse engineer some of the principles behind the Alliance's fleets, applying them in ways that the invaders would not anticipate. This was not just technical development. It was a combination of creativity, intuition, and strategic thinking. Humans did not rely solely on brute force, they relied on brains, adaptability, and teamwork. At the same time, Earth's military planners organized a fleet capable of rapid response. Ships were smaller and more agile than the massive war vessels of the Alliance, but they were equipped with advanced weapons, stealth systems, and adaptive defenses. Pilots trained rigorously to perform maneuvers that no alien commander would expect, exploiting the weaknesses that had been observed in previous Alliance engagements. Humans were learning from history even before directly facing their enemy, turning intelligence into preparation and preparation into a silent advantage. Finally, the moment came when the Alliance's expansion reached sectors closer to Earth. Their fleets were engaged in attacks on other colonies, unaware that human observation and analysis were constant. Humans had already anticipated the next targets and had prepared ambushes, defensive strategies, and countermeasures. The first human engagement with the Alliance was not an accident. It was deliberate. Humanity had calculated every possible scenario, every risk, and every potential outcome. They were ready to show the galaxy that even a small, underestimated civilization could fight back. When Earth's first fleet entered the battle, the Alliance was shocked. They had expected resistance, of course, but nothing on the scale, intelligence, or unpredictability of human tactics. Human ships did not follow the predictable patterns of other civilizations. They moved with speed, unpredictability, and coordination that confounded the Alliance's most experienced commanders. Human pilots executed maneuvers that made no conventional sense but were devastatingly effective, striking from angles the Alliance had never anticipated. In the first encounter, human ingenuity became immediately apparent. The fleet used decoys, electronic warfare, and rapid-fire strike teams to divide and confuse the enemy. Alliance ships, though massive and powerful, were built for domination, not adaptability. They were accustomed to opponents who would fight predictably or surrender under pressure. Humans fought differently. They adapted in real time, learned from every move the enemy made, and exploited even the smallest mistakes. What seemed like small, insignificant actions on the human side caused disproportionate chaos in the Alliance's ranks. Observers across the galaxy could hardly believe what they were seeing. Civilizations that had watched colonies fall in hours now saw a smaller fleet inflict serious damage on the deadliest forces known. The humans were proving that size and raw power were not the only paths to victory. Intelligence, coordination, creativity, and courage mattered just as much. Even the most fearsome commanders in the Deathworld Alliance found themselves struggling to predict human moves. They had never faced an enemy that learned, adapted, and evolved in the middle of battle. The first engagement was intense, chaotic, and dangerous. Humans suffered losses, of course. No victory comes without sacrifice. Ships were destroyed, brave pilots were lost, and strategies sometimes failed. But unlike other civilizations, humans learned quickly from each failure. Every loss was analyzed, every mistake corrected, and every insight applied immediately. They were not merely fighting. They were improving in real time, turning the chaos of battle into a classroom for rapid learning. This adaptability was something the Deathworld Alliance had never faced before, and it began to unnerve even their most confident leaders. As the battle progressed, humans began to gain momentum. Small targeted strikes crippled key components of the Alliance's fleet. Supply lines were disrupted, communication channels jammed, and command structures strained. What was supposed to be an easy victory for the Alliance turned into confusion and retreat in some sectors. The humans were not only surviving, they were controlling the pace and flow of battle. Their ability to think creatively and act decisively allowed them to punch far above their weight. Humanity's entry into the battle also inspired hope across the galaxy. Civilizations that had lived under the shadow of the Alliance's terror began to see that resistance was possible. Small fleets, local militias, and independent colonies watched and learned from human tactics. They realized that with intelligence, courage, and cooperation, even the deadliest forces could be challenged. The psychological impact of humans entering the battle was as important as the physical damage they inflicted. Fear, once absolute, began to crack. The Deathworld Alliance for the first time faced a real strategic challenge. They were forced to reconsider assumptions, adapt plans, and confront an enemy they could not simply overwhelm with brute force. Commanders debated, strategies were revised, and even the Alliance's most confident leaders began to question whether they had underestimated Earth. Humanity, once considered irrelevant, was now a significant factor in galactic conflict. This realization shook the foundations of the Alliance's arrogance and opened cracks in their previously unshakable confidence. Even within human ranks, the battles tested courage, skill, and determination. Pilots flew beyond the limits of their ships, commanders made decisions under extreme pressure, and engineers worked around the clock to repair damage and enhance performance. Humanity's victory was not the result of luck. It was the result of preparation, intelligence, and relentless perseverance. Every human contribution mattered, from the smallest support crew to the most decorated pilot. The sense of unity, purpose, and determination was palpable, giving humans an edge that technology alone could not provide. By the end of the first major engagement, the galaxy had witnessed something extraordinary. Humans, underestimated and untested, had inflicted real damage on the Deathworld Alliance. Ships had been destroyed, resources lost, and morale shaken. For the first time, the Alliance had to recognize that size, experience, and reputation were not enough to guarantee victory. They were facing a new kind of enemy, one that learned, adapted, and fought with courage, intelligence, and relentless determination. As the battle drew to a temporary halt, human leaders analyzed every outcome. They studied what worked, what failed, and how the Alliance responded. They refined strategies for the next engagement, knowing that the Alliance would not forgive mistakes. Humanity's approach was deliberate, patient, and calculated. They understood that the galaxy's deadliest adversaries required more than courage alone. They required cleverness, adaptability, and relentless determination. The first clash between humanity and the Deathworld Alliance marked a turning point. It showed that even a small, underestimated civilization could challenge the galaxy's most feared conquerors. Humans had entered the galactic stage, not as passive observers, but as active participants capable of shaping the course of history. Their ingenuity, bravery, and resilience became a beacon of hope not just for Earth, but for every civilization that had suffered under the shadow of the Alliance. The battle was far from over, but the first encounter had already changed perceptions. Humans had proven that courage and intelligence could overcome even overwhelming odds. The Deathworld Alliance had encountered their first real challenge, and the galaxy began to realize that the balance of power was no longer absolute. Humanity, underestimated and dismissed for so long, had made a statement. The deadliest alliance in the galaxy would not face victory without struggle, and the fight was only just beginning. The battle between humanity and the Deathworld Alliance escalated to levels that no one in the galaxy had anticipated. The initial surprise had worn off, but now the true test began. The Alliance, arrogant and confident, assumed that after the first encounter humans would falter under pressure. They believed that Earth's small fleets and inexperienced soldiers could never sustain prolonged conflict against their highly trained forces. But humans had learned quickly. Every skirmish, every engagement, every minor victory or loss had sharpened their understanding of the enemy. They were no longer fighting blindly. They were anticipating, adapting, and improving constantly. As the war continued, the Deathworld Alliance intensified their attacks. Entire sectors of space became battlegrounds with massive fleets clashing in brilliant displays of firepower. Asteroids and debris fields were used as shields, planets became fortresses, and deep space maneuvers challenged even the best-trained pilots. Humans faced overwhelming odds at every turn. Ships larger than entire cities unleashed torrents of destruction, and soldiers had to operate in conditions most beings could not survive. Yet, despite the terrifying power of their adversaries, humanity refused to retreat. Humans began employing strategies that were both bold and unconventional. They used smaller, faster ships to outmaneuver the Alliance's massive fleets, striking at critical points that the enemy never expected. Coordinated attacks on supply lines, communication channels, and command ships caused confusion among the Alliance ranks. It was not brute force that allowed humans to succeed, but ingenuity, timing, and unpredictability. Every engagement became a test of wits, a chess game played across vast regions of space. Where one wrong move could mean annihilation, the Deathworld Alliance, unaccustomed to facing such adaptive tactics, began to struggle. They were used to enemies who reacted predictably, who feared and obeyed, who relied on power alone to win. Humanity was different. Humans were unpredictable, willing to take risks that seemed insane, and capable of adapting instantly to changing circumstances. They did not rely solely on technology or weapons. They relied on teamwork, creativity, and determination. Every small action, every clever maneuver had the potential to turn the tide of battle. On the front lines, human pilots became legends almost overnight. They performed maneuvers that defied conventional physics using speed, agility, and distraction to neutralize much larger enemy ships. Engineers and support crews worked tirelessly behind the scenes, repairing damage in record time and improvising new technologies from limited resources. Soldiers on planetary fronts used guerrilla tactics, taking advantage of local terrain and knowledge to outsmart enemy forces. Human resilience and resourcefulness became the defining edge in a war that seemed almost impossible to win. At the same time, the human leadership showed remarkable strategic vision. Commanders coordinated multiple fleets across different sectors, ensuring that each battle served a purpose. They predicted enemy movements, anticipated counterattacks, and exploited weaknesses with precision. Unlike the Alliance, which often relied on intimidation and overwhelming power, humans relied on planning, coordination, and psychological insight. They understood that war was not just about destruction. It was about morale, perception, and adaptability. Despite the humans' cleverness, the cost of war was high. Ships were lost, soldiers were killed, and entire colonies faced the horrors of conflict. Families were torn apart, cities destroyed, and resources stretched to their limits. Humans faced the reality of war, the fear, the grief, and the pressure that came with defending against a seemingly unstoppable force. Yet even in the darkest moments, humanity persevered. Civilians contributed by producing supplies, repairing ships, and supporting soldiers. Every human effort mattered, creating a network of resilience that was difficult for the Alliance to comprehend or counter. The galaxy began to take notice. Civilizations that had cowered under the shadow of the Deathworld Alliance saw that resistance was possible. Small fleets and independent colonies began to coordinate with humanity, sharing intelligence, supplies, and strategies. The human approach inspired hope. Hope that even the deadliest conquerors could be challenged. And for the first time, the Deathworld Alliance faced not just individual resistance but organized, intelligent opposition. The tide of fear that had long protected them began to shift. The Alliance's arrogance became a liability. They assumed that humans could be crushed with a single decisive strike, but humans never acted predictably. They studied the Alliance's tactics, learned from past mistakes, and developed countermeasures faster than the enemy could respond. Every attempt to overwhelm the humans was met with adaptation. Fleet formations designed to intimidate were outflanked. Assaults intended to annihilate were turned into traps. What the Alliance expected to be a straightforward conquest became a complex, draining war of attrition. In the middle of these battles, human ingenuity shone brightest. Engineers developed new weapons that used the enemy's own technology against them. Pilots learned to exploit weaknesses in ship shields, turning even minor design flaws into devastating advantages. Ground forces used environmental hazards and local knowledge to ambush enemy units, causing chaos and slowing their advance. Human creativity transformed desperation into opportunity, proving that brains could rival brawn in the deadliest of wars. As the conflict dragged on, the Deathworld Alliance began to show cracks in their cohesion. Commanders disagreed on strategy, and communication breakdowns caused confusion in the field. They were used to obedience and fear, but humans refused to act predictably, creating uncertainty at every level. Losses that might have been considered minor became critical, as the Alliance struggled to maintain its once unshakable dominance. The humans' resilience forced the enemy to question long-held assumptions about superiority, forcing them to adapt in ways they had never needed before. The human presence also had a profound psychological effect on the Alliance's troops. Soldiers who had never faced meaningful resistance began to doubt themselves. They had been trained to dominate and destroy, yet humans fought with determination, intelligence, and unity that challenged every expectation. Morale, once absolute, began to falter in some units, while human victories, even small ones, inspired hope among other civilizations. The psychological shift was subtle but crucial. Humans were showing the galaxy that fear alone was not enough to control the stars. On Earth, leaders carefully monitored every battle, every engagement, and every outcome. They were constantly refining strategies, analyzing patterns, and adjusting tactics in real time. This relentless attention to detail allowed humans to maximize efficiency, minimize losses, and exploit weaknesses. Every human success was amplified by careful planning, ensuring that momentum continued to build. They understood that the war would be long and difficult, but they were willing to endure and adapt for the sake of survival and victory. Despite the human successes, the Alliance was far from defeated. They still controlled vast territories, massive fleets, and some of the deadliest warriors in the galaxy. The battles were not easy, and each engagement required ingenuity, courage, and sacrifice. Yet humanity's entry into the war had already reshaped the battlefield. The Alliance could no longer rely on fear, intimidation, or sheer power alone. They were facing a force that could learn, adapt, and strike back effectively, changing the nature of the conflict forever. The turning point of this stage in the war was not just physical, but symbolic. Humans, once considered insignificant, had proven that they could fight, survive, and even influence the course of the galaxy's deadliest conflict. Every victory, every clever maneuver, and every act of courage sent a clear message. The Deathworld Alliance could no longer assume dominance. The galaxy began to see that an underestimated power, with intelligence, unity, and determination, could challenge even the most feared conquerors. As the war progressed, humans continued to refine their tactics. They learned to coordinate across multiple fronts, predict enemy maneuvers, and exploit every advantage. Civilians, soldiers, engineers, and pilots all contributed, creating a unified force that combined intelligence, courage, and creativity. The battles became less about overwhelming strength and more about strategy, coordination, and adaptability, areas where humanity excelled. By the end of this phase, it was clear that the war had changed. The Deathworld Alliance was no longer the unstoppable force it had once seemed. Humans had introduced unpredictability, innovation, and determination that the Alliance could not easily counter. The galaxy watched in awe as humanity, underestimated for so long, reshaped the battlefield with courage, intelligence, and relentless perseverance. The struggles of this period laid the groundwork for the ultimate confrontation. where humanity would continue to prove that even the smallest civilization could stand against the greatest threats the galaxy had ever known. The war between humanity and the Deathworld Alliance had reached its climax. For months, humans had fought with determination, ingenuity, and courage, slowly turning the tide against one of the deadliest forces in the galaxy. The Alliance, once seemingly unstoppable, was now showing signs of strain. Commanders argued over strategy. Fleets that had once moved with precision now hesitated, and morale among their soldiers was faltering. Humanity's persistence and adaptability had changed the battlefield, proving that even the most feared conquerors could be challenged by intelligence, coordination, and relentless determination. Earth's fleets, small but highly coordinated, had become legendary across the galaxy. Every ship, pilot, and soldier played a critical role, and every engagement demonstrated the strength of teamwork and strategy over brute force. Humans had learned from every encounter, quickly identifying weaknesses in the Alliance's tactics and exploiting them in ways no one had predicted. The Deathworld Alliance had faced many powerful civilizations before, but none had been as unpredictable, adaptable, or relentless as humanity. This new reality forced them to rethink everything they believed about strength, strategy, and superiority. The turning point in the final stage of the war came during a massive confrontation near a cluster of resource-rich planets. The Deathworld Alliance had amassed its largest fleet yet, intending to crush humanity once and for all. Their plan was simple: overwhelm the human forces with sheer numbers and firepower, leaving no room for resistance. But humans, anticipating the attack, had prepared a complex network of defenses and countermeasures. Every sector of space was monitored, every potential approach analyzed, and every maneuver calculated. Humans had learned to fight not just with ships and weapons, but with intelligence, foresight, and creativity. When the fleets collided, the battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Massive ships fired volleys that lit up the void, while smaller human vessels darted through the chaos, striking at critical targets. Humans used feints, decoys, and electronic warfare to disrupt enemy coordination. They targeted supply lines, communications arrays, and command vessels, creating confusion that the Alliance struggled to overcome. Every move was calculated, every strike purposeful, and every engagement designed to weaken the enemy strategically rather than merely destroy them. Despite the overwhelming power of the Alliance, humanity's strategy began to work. Their fleet's mobility allowed them to evade massive attacks while simultaneously striking at vulnerable points. Pilots performed maneuvers that seemed impossible, using speed, timing, and coordination to outwit ships far larger and more powerful. Ground forces on planets played their own role, sabotaging supply depots, disabling weapons installations, and coordinating with orbital forces to maximize damage. Humanity's ability to fight as a unified, intelligent, and flexible force gave them an advantage that brute strength alone could not counter. The Deathworld Alliance, confronted with unexpected losses and unanticipated tactics, began to falter. Commanders who were used to absolute obedience faced soldiers who hesitated, confused by the humans' unpredictable strategies. Even their most experienced pilots found themselves outmaneuvered, forced into retreats they had never expected to make. Every failed assault, every damaged ship, and every miscalculation eroded the Alliance's confidence. The fear and intimidation they had relied on for centuries were no longer enough to ensure compliance. Humanity had proven that courage, ingenuity, and coordination could match and even surpass raw power. As the battle raged, humans continued to innovate. Engineers on repair ships devised rapid field modifications, turning damaged vessels into new threats. Scientists deployed experimental weapons that exploited the weaknesses identified in the Alliance's fleet. Pilots executed coordinated strikes that targeted key leaders, disrupting command structures and spreading confusion. Even civilians played a role, supporting logistics, producing essential supplies, and maintaining communication networks. The war effort became a testament to the power of collective action, demonstrating that every individual contribution could have a strategic impact. One of the most critical moments came when humans executed a daring maneuver to isolate the Alliance's flagship fleet. Using a combination of deception, speed, and precision strikes, they drew the enemy away from its support vessels, leaving it vulnerable to concentrated attacks. Human pilots attacked relentlessly, exploiting the flagship's slow response and large size. Ground-based artillery and orbital weapons joined the assault, targeting vital systems with pinpoint accuracy. The flagship, once the symbol of the Alliance's power, was forced to retreat, marking a significant turning point in the war. This victory had profound effects on both sides. For humans, it was a moment of immense pride and confidence. Months of preparation, strategy, and sacrifice had paid off, proving that even the most powerful adversaries could be challenged. For the Deathworld Alliance, it was a shock to the system. Their dominance, built over centuries, had been shaken by a civilization they had dismissed as insignificant. Confidence turned into doubt, arrogance into fear, and their ability to coordinate effectively was weakened. Humanity had not just won battles, they had changed the perception of what was possible in the galaxy. Following the flagship's retreat, humans continued their campaign with careful precision. They liberated planets that had been occupied by the Alliance, coordinated with other civilizations to strengthen defenses, and applied constant pressure on remaining Alliance forces. The once unstoppable conquerors found themselves gradually pushed back, their resources stretched and their influence diminishing. Humanity's entry into the war had not only halted the Alliance's expansion, it had reversed it. Every victory inspired hope across the galaxy, encouraging previously subjugated civilizations to resist and fight back. The Deathworld Alliance attempted desperate counterattacks, but humans had prepared for every scenario. They anticipated enemy moves, set traps, and exploited every weakness. Even when facing larger numbers, humans leveraged strategy, speed, and adaptability to neutralize threats. The Alliance, confident in their overwhelming firepower, now faced the reality that intelligence, coordination, and morale were equally powerful weapons. The war had transformed into a battle not just of strength but of wits, ingenuity, and human determination. Eventually, the Alliance's leaders realized that further resistance was futile. Their fleets were depleted, morale was shattered, and their once feared soldiers were exhausted and demoralized. Key planets had been liberated, supply lines severed, and command structures disrupted. Humanity, underestimated and dismissed at the start of the conflict, had become the dominant force in the theater of war. The Alliance, recognizing their inability to recover, was forced to retreat from key positions, surrendering territory, and abandoning plans for conquest. The aftermath of the war was as transformative as the conflict itself. Humanity emerged not only victorious but respected across the galaxy. Formerly subjugated civilizations now looked to Earth for guidance, alliances, and collaboration. Humans had demonstrated that even a civilization considered minor could challenge the most powerful conquerors through intelligence, courage, and unity. The galaxy's balance of power had shifted, and new coalitions began forming, guided by the lessons of humanity's strategy and perseverance. Victory came at a cost, however. Ships had been lost, lives sacrificed, and entire systems damaged by the long war. Humanity mourned its losses but celebrated its achievements. The battle had tested every aspect of human ingenuity, courage, and resilience. It had shown that preparation, intelligence, and adaptability could overcome even the most terrifying odds. The story of humanity's rise from a minor, underestimated civilization to a respected galactic power became a source of inspiration for generations to come. For the Deathworld Alliance, the defeat was humiliating and transformative. They had learned that dominance could not rely solely on fear and power. Even the deadliest forces could be challenged if underestimated opponents fought with intelligence, creativity, and determination. The lessons were harsh but undeniable. The galaxy had changed, and any future campaigns would require careful strategy, respect for opponents, and humility. Humanity's victory marked the beginning of a new era. Former colonies and civilizations that had suffered under the Alliance's rule were now free, and interstellar alliances shifted in response to the new balance of power. Earth had proven that a small, determined civilization could stand against overwhelming odds and emerge victorious. The war had reshaped politics, alliances, and perceptions across the stars, leaving a lasting legacy of courage, strategy, and hope. In the end, humanity's triumph was not just about defeating the Deathworld Alliance. It was about proving that intelligence, perseverance, and unity could overcome even the most terrifying adversaries. Humans had entered the galaxy as a minor power, underestimated and dismissed, yet they had changed the course of history through determination, courage, and ingenuity. The galaxy would remember Earth's role in this conflict for centuries, as the civilization that faced the deadliest conquerors and refused to be defeated.